James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, 1963, is a powerful exploration of race, religion, identity, and the moral obligations of America in the face of systemic racism. Divided into two essays, My Dungeon Shook, Letter to My Nephew on the 100th Anniversary of the Emancipation, and Down at the Cross, Letter from a Region in My Mind, the book combines personal reflection with incisive social critique. Baldwin addresses the lived realities of Black Americans under the shadow of racism, challenges the hypocrisies of American ideals, and calls for a collective reckoning to avert destruction. The title, drawn from a spiritual hymn, warns that without meaningful change, the nation may face destruction akin to biblical fire. Essay 1. My Dungeon Shook. A letter to Baldwin's nephew. In the opening essay, Baldwin writes a heartfelt letter to his 14-year-old nephew, James, offering both wisdom and a candid reflection on America's racial injustices. Baldwin begins by expressing love and concern for his nephew, acknowledging the challenges he will face as a young Black man in a racially oppressive society. He frames his advice within the broader historical context of systemic racism, tracing the enduring legacy of slavery and segregation. The burden of identity. Baldwin emphasizes the psychological toll of racism on Black Americans. He explains how society's perception of Black people as inferior and expendable is a deliberate lie designed to sustain white supremacy. He urges his nephew not to internalize this false narrative or measure his worth by the standards of a society that dehumanizes him. The role of white Americans. Baldwin challenges white Americans to confront their own complicity in maintaining racial oppression. He argues that their inability to face the truth about their history and privilege perpetuates injustice. For Baldwin, true liberation requires white Americans to abandon the myths of superiority and acknowledge the humanity of Black people. Love as a revolutionary force. Despite the harsh realities of racism, Baldwin expresses hope. He calls for love, not a passive or sentimental love, but a fierce and transformative one. This love, Baldwin believes, has the power to transcend hatred and fear, enabling both Black and white Americans to imagine a new, more equitable future. Essay 2. Down at the Cross. A Personal Journey with Faith. The second essay is more extensive and deeply personal, recounting Baldwin's relationship with Christianity and his journey towards spiritual and intellectual liberation. As a teenager in Harlem, Baldwin found refuge in the church, where he became a preacher. Initially, religion provided him with a sense of purpose and community, but over time, he grew disillusioned with its contradictions. Baldwin critiques Christianity as a tool of oppression, arguing that it has been used to justify slavery, segregation, and the subjugation of Black people. He contends that the church, instead of addressing systemic racism, often reinforces it by promoting submission and deference to white authority. Encounter with the Nation of Islam. Baldwin reflects on a meeting with Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, a group that emerged as a counterpoint to Christianity's complicity in racial oppression. The Nation of Islam rejected integration and preached Black self-reliance, often casting white people as inherently evil. While Baldwin respects the nation's critique of racism and its emphasis on Black pride, he ultimately rejects its separatist ideology. He warns against replacing one form of hatred with another, as this perpetuates division rather than fostering understanding. The danger of absolutes. Baldwin argues against absolutist ideologies, whether they come from white supremacy, religious dogma, or Black nationalism. He believes that such rigid beliefs limit the potential for genuine human connection and progress. Instead, he advocates for a more nuanced understanding of human complexity, rooted in humility and empathy. The broader context. America's moral crisis. Racism as America's original sin. Baldwin situates America's racial divide within its broader history, describing racism as the nation's original sin. He highlights the hypocrisy of a country that proclaims liberty and equality while systematically oppressing black people. This contradiction, Baldwin argues, threatens the moral foundation of America itself. He critiques the American dream as a construct built on the exploitation of black labor and the denial of black humanity. Baldwin warns that unless America confronts its history and dismantles systemic racism, it will remain trapped in a cycle of inequality and violence. The role of fear. Baldwin identifies fear as a central driver of racism. White Americans, he argues, fear losing their power and privilege, while black Americans live in fear of violence and dehumanization. This mutual fear creates a destructive dynamic that prevents meaningful dialogue and change. To overcome this, Baldwin calls for courage, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, to question deeply held beliefs, and to imagine a more just society. Baldwin's vision for the future. Interdependence and shared humanity. Baldwin emphasizes the interconnectedness of all people, arguing that black and white Americans are bound by a shared history and destiny. He rejects the idea that one group's liberation can come at the expense of another's, insisting that true freedom requires collective transformation. A moral reckoning. Baldwin challenges both black and white Americans to engage in a moral reckoning. For black Americans, this means rejecting self-hatred and embracing their inherent worth. For white Americans, it involves acknowledging their complicity in racism and working to dismantle the structures that uphold it. Hope through action. While Baldwin's critique is unflinching, he does not succumb to despair. He believes in the possibility of change, but only if individuals take responsibility for creating it. He calls for action rooted in love, courage, and a commitment to justice. Key themes and insights. 1. Race and identity. Baldwin explores how systemic racism shapes identity, limiting both black and white Americans. For black Americans, it imposes a sense of inferiority. For white Americans, it creates a false sense of superiority. Baldwin argues that both groups must break free from these constructs to realize their full humanity. 2. Religion and morality. Baldwin critiques organized religion as both a source of comfort and a tool of oppression. He urges individuals to seek moral clarity not through dogma, but through an honest engagement with history and human experience. 3. The cycle of oppression. Baldwin highlights how racism perpetuates itself through fear, ignorance, and denial. Breaking this cycle requires confronting uncomfortable truths and embracing a more inclusive vision of humanity. 4. The power of love. For Baldwin, love is a radical force capable of dismantling hate and fear. It requires vulnerability, courage, and a willingness to see others as fully human. Legacy and relevance. The Fire Next Time remains a seminal work in American literature and civil rights discourse. Baldwin's insights into race, power, and identity continue to resonate in contemporary discussions of systemic racism and social justice. His writing challenges readers to confront the moral implications of inequality and to imagine a more just and equitable future. While Baldwin's critique is rooted in the context of 1960s America, its themes are timeless. His call for love, courage, and collective action remains a powerful reminder of the work required to achieve true equality.